trying to wrap your head around, the global economy right now in 2025.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there are some sectors that just, they really stand out
Yeah.
as like major opportunities. And today we're going to take a deep dive into one of those,
Okay.
the global propane market.
Hmm.
We've got this really interesting market report here that digs into,
Yeah.
what's happening now and where things are headed.
Right.
Our mission is to kind of extract the most important insights from this report
Okay.
and identify the key growth areas so
Yeah.
you can get a good grasp on the current state and the future potential of the propane market.
Yeah, it's like think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding a really crucial piece of the global energy puzzle.
Right.
This report, it gives us data-backed insights into where the propane market is
Okay.
and most importantly, where it's going.
Right.
We just want to make that information, clear and useful for you.
So jumping right in. This report tells us that the global propane market
Okay.
right now in 2025
Mm-hmm.
is sitting at a pretty substantial USD, $842 million. But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Yeah.
There's some pretty significant expansion on the horizon.
Absolutely. Projections are showing that the market could reach USD 1,249.34 million by 2033.
Wow.
Which is, that's pretty substantial growth.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is
Yeah.
the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR.
Yeah, for CAGR.
Which is estimated at 4.2% between 2025 and 2033.
Right.
So think of CAGR as like the average yearly growth rate over that time period.
Yeah.
So basically a steady and predictable expansion of a little over 4% each year.
Yeah.
For the next 8 years.
Makes sense.
So what's driving this growth? What's making propane so attractive globally?
The report points to one main thing, the rising global demand for cleaner energy alternatives.
Right.
So as the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions becomes more urgent, propane is becoming, a viable option across lots of different sectors.
Right.
And, one of the main reasons for that is that it burns cleaner than some traditional fuels.
Okay, so cleaner and potentially more efficient.
Right.
Now, this is a global picture.
Okay.
But let's zoom in geographically.
Yeah.
What are the different regions looking like in terms of market size and growth?
So the report breaks it down pretty well by region.
Yeah.
North America accounts for a pretty big chunk of the market.
Okay.
Around 30% of global revenue.
Wow.
In 2025,
okay.
With a market size of USD 2447.76 million.
So North America is a major player right now.
Yeah, they are.
But are they growing as fast as other parts of the world?
Well, not quite. Their projected CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is about 2.5%.
Okay.
Now, within that, the United States holds the biggest share with a market size of USD 1931.28 million in 2025 and a slightly lower CAGR of 2.3%. The report highlights a couple of things driving the U.S. market, off-grid usage.
Yeah.
And its use in transportation.
Right, off-grid living and propane-powered vehicles.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Now, what about Canada and Mexico?
Yeah, what's happening there?
So Canada's market is about USD 293.73 million in 2025. And it has a slightly stronger CAGR of 3.3%.
Okay.
The report points out that propane is a really important energy source up there, especially in those rural and northern areas of Canada.
Right.
And then you've got Mexico with a market size of USD 222.75 million and a CAGR of 3%. Their demand is mainly driven by residential needs and in agriculture.
So even within North America, the specific uses, growth drivers are different.
Absolutely.
Interesting how those local needs can really shape things.
Yeah.
Now let's hop across the Atlantic to Europe.
Okay.
What's the situation over there?
So Europe represents about 25% of the global propane market in terms of revenue in 2025. Their market size is USD 241.79 million.
Okay.
And they have a CAGR of 3.7%, which is, a bit more dynamic than North America's.
Yeah, it is a bit higher.
Right.
Which countries in Europe are really pushing that growth?
Well, the United Kingdom has a market size of USD 359.82 million.
Okay. And
a pretty robust KGR of 4.5%. And that's fueled by their growing adoption of propane as a cleaner energy alternative.
Yeah.
Germany is another big one.
Right.
Their market size is USD 424.07 million, and they have a 3.9% CAGR. Propane is playing a part in their efforts to reduce carbon emissions.
Okay.
Russia, France, Italy, and Spain all have significant markets, too, each with their own growth trajectories.
So it seems like a pretty diverse market landscape across Europe.
Yeah, it is.
Is there like a common factor
There is.
that's driving that growth?
One thing that's really interesting about Europe is the impact of their environmental regulations. The report specifically talks about stringent rules like the European F-gas regulation.
Okay.
This regulation favors refrigerants with a low global warming potential, or GWP. GWP is a way of measuring how much a greenhouse gas contributes to global warming compared to carbon dioxide.
Right.
And propane has a low GWP. So that makes it attractive, as an alternative to some other refrigerants.
I see.
So that's a key driver for propane adoption.
Okay.
Especially in things like cooling and heating applications.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about North America and Europe.
Okay.
Now let's shift gears to Asia Pacific.
Right.
APAC often comes up when we're talking about high growth.
It does.
What's the propane story in that region?
So APAC is a huge player in the global propane market.
Right.
They've got the largest share at 36% of global revenue in 2025.
Wow, that's big.
With a market size of USD 347.12 million.
Huge.
And even more interesting, it's the fastest growing region with a projected CAGR of 5.6% from 2025 to 2033.
Wow.
So this rapid expansion in APAC, it's not just a regional thing. It's like a signal, a leading indicator of global energy trends, especially in developing economies that are focused on things like industrialization and cleaner cooling solutions.
So that 5.6% is a really significant growth rate.
It is.
Which countries in APAC are really driving that?
Well, China's in the lead.
Okay.
They have a massive market size of USD 1,421.79 million.
Yeah.
And a CAGR of 5.1%.
Okay.
That's driven by both industrial expansion and government support for those low GWP refrigerants.
Right.
But India's really interesting.
Yeah.
They have the highest growth rate in the whole report.
Wow.
A remarkable 7.5% CGR.
Wow, 7.5% in India.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Their market size is USD 314.71 million in 2025.
Okay.
And that's fueled by rapid industrialization and policies that support sustainable cooling. Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Southeast Asia.
They're all showing strong growth, too?
So 7.5% in India is definitely a key takeaway.
It is.
What makes APAC such a dynamic market?
It's a few things. Rapid industrialization.
Yeah.
Increasing urbanization.
Yeah.
And a strong focus from governments across the region on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The demand for cooling and refrigeration is growing like crazy over there.
Oh, okay.
In everything from industrial processes to food storage.
So those are all contributing to the demand for propane.
Absolutely.
So we've got North America and Europe as established players.
Right.
And APAC is the region with the fastest growth.
Yeah.
What about the other regions?
Okay.
South America, the Middle East, and Africa.
Let's take a look.
Yeah.
South America holds about 4% of the global market share in 2025.
Okay.
With a market size of USD 332.2 million and a CGR of 4.9%. Brazil and Argentina are the big players down there.
Okay.
Driven by expanding refrigeration infrastructure and the rising demand for eco-friendly refrigerants. And how about the Middle East?
So the Middle East also has a 4% global market share with a market size of USD 349.68 million in 2025 and a CAGR of 5.4%. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are the key markets there, with growth driven by industrialization and that shift toward low GWP refrigerants.
Right.
Turkey and Qatar are also showing some really promising growth.
Okay, good to know.
And finally, you have Africa.
Yeah, what's happening in Africa?
So they have about 3.7% of the global market in 2025, with a market size of USD 323.45 million and a CGR of 3.8%. South Africa is the biggest market there, and they're really focused on adopting those eco-friendly refrigerants.
Right.
The overall growth in Africa is being driven by this need for cost-effective and environmentally friendly energy solutions, especially in refrigeration, to support their growing population and their economies.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've got this global picture with APAC really leading the charge. But the report also dives into the different forms of propane.
Right.
the grades and how it's used. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Okay.
Liquid versus gaseous propane.
Okay.
What's the breakdown there?
So the report tells us that liquid propane is the dominant form right now. That's mainly because of its high energy density.
Okay.
It's just very efficient for storage and transportation.
Yeah.
And that's really important for those large-scale uses,
Yeah.
industrial and commercial uses, as well as residential heating, cooking, and agriculture, especially in areas where you don't have natural gas pipelines.
Right. So those are the classic propane tanks you see everywhere.
Exactly. Those are the ones.
Makes sense.
Now, the report did mention that gaseous propane is actually the fastest growing form.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Why is that?
Well, the gaseous propane segment is seeing the most rapid growth. And it's mainly because of the increasing demand for cleaner energy. In transportation and agriculture, propane-powered vehicles are becoming more and more popular as an alternative to gasoline and diesel because they have a lower environmental impact and they can potentially save money. You know, this is kind of an interesting story, isn't it?
It is.
While the current infrastructure is set up for liquid propane, the future demand, especially from transportation, suggests there's a huge opportunity for growth and innovation in gaseous propane technologies and infrastructure.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is.
So what about the different grades of propane that are mentioned in the report?
So the report highlights HD5 propane as the dominant grade. It's got a high level of purity, which makes it good for vehicles, residential heating, and industrial uses. And it helps make sure that, it meets those emissions regulations. It's often the standard grade, especially for transportation in the U.S.
So that's kind of the workhorse right now.
It is.
But what about growth?
Yeah.
Is there a particular grade?
Well, commercial propane is identified as the fastest growing grade.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, it's because it's being used more and more in industrial settings and in remote locations for things like bulk heating power generation and as a fuel for equipment in sectors like agriculture and construction, especially where other energy sources aren't really an option. So while HD5s is the most common, commercial propane is being adopted quickly in those more specialized and off-grid applications.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got the forms and the grades.
Right.
Now let's talk about the applications. Where's the biggest demand for propane right now?
So the biggest demand is in the residential sector. People use propane in their homes for heating, cooking, and hot water systems. It's especially important in those off-grid and rural areas where you don't have natural gas.
So it's a reliable option.
It is.
For those communities.
Yeah.
Okay, but where's the growth happening? Which sectors are using more propane?
Well, the fastest growing segment is transportation.
Interesting.
Yeah, more and more people are using propane as an alternative fuel for vehicles, especially businesses and public services that are using propane for their fleets. That's really driving this growth. You know, propane has lower emissions, and it can be cheaper than traditional fuels. So it's a pretty attractive option.
Okay, so residential is still the biggest.
It is.
But transportation is catching up.
It is.
Now, beyond just the numbers, what's shaping this market?
Wow.
What are the drivers? The restraints and the trends that we should be aware of?
The report outlines a few key dynamics, as we've already discussed. The global demand for cleaner energy is a big driver. And the use of propane in transportation and the steady demand from residential users, especially in areas without natural gas. Those are all really important factors.
Okay, so those are the drivers. What could potentially hold the market back?
Well, one thing is the price volatility of propane. You know, it's often linked to what's happening with oil and natural gas. So when those prices fluctuate, propane prices can be affected too. That can be a challenge.
It can.
And propane also faces competition from other alternative energy sources like natural gas and electricity. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Okay, so we've got price volatility and competition. What about trends? What's shaping the future of the propane market?
So one big trend is the increasing adoption of propane-powered vehicles, especially for fleets. And there's a growing focus on the environmental benefits of propane. And some governments are even offering incentives to encourage people to use it as a cleaner burning fuel.
So that push for cleaner energy,
Yeah.
it's not just a driver.
Right.
It's actually shaping how the market's changing.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected.
Yeah. Yes. This is a huge market with a lot of players.
It is.
Who are the major players?
Okay, so in the propane market,
Yeah.
you've got a mix of big global corporations and regional companies. On the production side, you've got giants like ExxonMobil Corporation,
Okay.
Gazprom Shell PLC, Saudi Aramco,
Right.
and China Petroleum and Chemical Corporation, which is also known as Sinopec.
Okay.
Now, for distribution and retail,
Yeah.
some of the big ones are Air Liquide BP, PLC Chevron Corporation,
Okay.
China National Petroleum Corporation, or PetroChina,
Yep.
ConocoPhillips Company, Eni SPAJL, India Limited, Amerigas Ferrellgas, and Suburban Propane.
That's quite a list.
It is.
What are all those companies focusing on?
Well, they're focusing on a few key areas.
Okay.
Developing and promoting clean energy solutions that use propane. Improving the efficiency of their fuel distribution.
Okay.
And driving innovation.
Yeah.
In how they extract, store, and transport propane.
Right.
A lot of them are also investing in research and development to find new uses for propane. They're expanding their distribution networks to reach new markets.
Okay.
And they're forming partnerships to strengthen their position in the market.
So they're all about efficiency and innovation
to
keep up with the changing energy landscape.
Exactly.
It sounds like a really dynamic space.
It is.
The report also mentioned some recent developments.
Right.
What's been happening in early 2025.
Yeah, there have been a few interesting things.
Oh.
The Propane Education and Research Council, or PERC, launched a program to study the performance and efficiency of propane-fueled cooling and combined heat and power equipment, which is also known as CHP, in commercial and industrial settings.
So they want to see how well propane works.
Yeah, they want to gather real-world data. So they can promote propane as a viable energy solution.
Okay, so that's a step towards expanding propane use in those sectors.
It is.
What else is happening?
Well, SWEP, a company that specializes in heating and cooling, they announced a new propane testing rig in Sweden.
Okay.
This rig is designed to develop sustainable heating and cooling systems that meet the requirements of the European F-gas regulation.
Right, the one that favors low GWP refrigerants.
Exactly.
Okay, so companies are actively innovating.
They are.
And investing in these technologies that are in line with those environmental regulations.
Yeah, you know, in fact, SWEP opened a large-scale propane testing facility in December 2024.
Wow.
This facility is all about developing raised plate heat exchangers that are optimized for natural refrigerants.
Okay.
And again, a big focus on meeting those F-gas regulation requirements. So it's clear that the industry is responding to this growing demand for more sustainable cooling and heating technologies.
Right. And those technologies are using propane and other natural refrigerants.
Exactly.
So these recent developments are a real-world example.
Yeah, they are.
Of how these trends are actually playing out in the industry.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for someone trying to understand the global propane market in 2025?
Okay, so the global propane market in 2025, it's big.
Okay.
And it's still growing. The market size is projected to be over USD 8 billion.
Okay.
And we expect significant expansion in the coming years.
Okay.
Potentially exceeding USD 12 billion by 2033.
Wow.
The Asia-Pacific region is going to see the fastest growth.
Right.
And the transportation sector is a crucial area where demand for propane is increasing.
Okay.
You know, the push for cleaner energy and those environmental regulations. Those are the major forces shaping this market.
So understanding these trends, it's not just about propane itself.
Yeah, it's not.
It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Right.
Of how the global energy landscape is changing.
Yeah, and the opportunities that come with it.
Exactly.
By recognizing those growth areas, the drivers, and how propane is being used, you can get some valuable insights into how global energy consumption is shifting and the role that propane is playing in that.
Okay, so it's about more than just the propane market.
Exactly. It is.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
About the future. And how we power our world. This global focus on cleaner fuels.
Right.
And the growth in those areas we talked about.
Yeah.
Like propane-powered vehicles and commercial uses. those could be early signs
Yeah.
that we're on the verge of some big changes
Right.
in how we consume energy,
Yeah.
maybe in ways we haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
You're welcome.
It's been fascinating.
It has.